Welcome back in. It's Jeff Hansen. We're talking BYU sports. It's a rainy Saturday afternoon. Really excited to get into some stuff that you guys have asked with a round of mailbag questions. I got so many questions this week. We're going to split things into two and do 2 different days worth of mailbag videos because there was a lot of really, really good questions. I couldn't really decide which ones I wanted to whittle out. I decided let's answer everything. We're kind of in the doldrums of training camp right now. No new news is happening. There's lots of position battles. Everybody across the board, from Aaron Roderick and the quarterback to Jay Hill and the safeties to Kelly Papinga and the punters, every coach is being a little bit coy about position battles and depth chart right now. It's all just a bunch of jockeying and saying a lot of words that don't really mean anything. So it's really kind of tough to talk about news. There's not any news happening, although there are lots of things happening. So opened it up on Twitter, said, hey, look, let's get some mailbag questions in so that I don't just guess what people want to talk about. I hear it straight from you guys. So we're going to split this into 2. It might be a little bit long, but it could have been really, really long. We'll get to as many of these as we can in a reasonable amount of time. All right. So first question from Steven. Who, in your opinion, are BYU's 3 must-get recruits for the 2025 class? You know, if you would have asked me a few weeks ago, I would have said Semi Taulanga, and I still believe that. Defensive tackle, BYU's got to find a defensive tackle in this class. The modern-day target who went to Utah, he's the guy that I would have had pegged. So now it's somebody else, and there's got to be some sort of a defensive tackle. There's got to be a presence along the defensive line in this recruiting class beyond just guys who play the edge. Austin Peay is another one. You can't lose a Peay. Like, forget how good he is, and he's very, very good. Forget his offer list. Forget the fact that he's a near 4-star prospect and maybe will be a 4-star by the time all is said and done. Forget all of that. He's a Peay. You can't lose a Peay, especially when you have 2 brothers on the team right now. He goes to Lone Peak. It's BYU's backyard. Austin Peay is a must get. And then for me, one that they've already got, LaMason Waller, they've got to hold on. LaMason Waller's a big-time wide receiver. I think he's going to do a lot of really good things as a senior in high school. BYU's going to have to hold on tight to get a guy like that. Similar to how it was with Trey Alexander a year ago. When you get those really, really talented players, a commitment doesn't mean anything. Schools are going to continue to call, continue to go after them, especially a guy who's outside of the BYU footprint, not a member of the church, anything like that, from out of state. Schools are going to look at that and say, I think we could flip him from BYU. So LaMason Waller, BYU, has got to hold on. This was a great question. Okay, and similar to this is the next question from my guy, Mikey G. Mike, good to talk to you again. Always a big fan of the show. Mike asks, what's the best and hardest part covering high school recruiting? The best is easy. Getting to know these players, especially players who don't expect it. You know, you cover some guys that they're the 4-star, 5-star guys. Everybody's after them. They're annoyed when people like me call, and I get it. I would be annoyed because, you know, if they've got 35 scholarship offers, figure there's 2 or 3 reporters from every team who's recruiting them that's constantly reaching out. I would be annoyed by me too. But the guys that didn't expect it, there's some in every class that they really respect. They really appreciate the attention. And it's all just they can't believe that it's happening. And getting to know those players and those stories without question, without a doubt, that's the best part of covering recruiting. What's the hardest part? This is something that I think fans generally don't know because of a lack of exposure, because coaches can't talk about recruiting. So it's really just pegging down information. So what's so tricky about recruiting is a recruit can tell me one thing on a specific day and say, hey, really high on BYU, love BYU, want to go to BYU. BYU may not be really high on that player. So if I report the news from the player that says, hey, so-and-so wants to go to BYU, and then they end up committing to Utah State, it's like, Jeff, what happened? Well, BYU didn't want them. But then Utah State fans would look at that and say, well, of course he didn't, because BYU, it's always a little bit weird. There's so many central positions of truth in the recruiting world that it gets really difficult to figure out what's real and what's not. That's probably the most difficult part of covering recruiting. All right, getting into some of the team stuff here. With the season about to kick off, do you think Kalani Sitake is feeling any pressure? Is there buzz about his job security, and what kind of season would it take for him to stay off the hot seat? I don't think it's as simple as wins and losses. Well, let's address the first part. absolutely yes, there is pressure. And absolutely yes, Kalani hears it. He knows, everybody is aware. Whether they put any weight into it or they make any decisions as a result of it, probably not. But yes, I mean, everybody in Provo is aware that if Kalani struggles, if this team comes out and lays a flat 5-7, then yeah, they're probably done. And we're looking at a new era going into 2026. So yes, there's pressure. I mean, that's not breaking news to anybody. But what kind of season would it take to avoid the hot seat? I don't want to sit here and say, oh, 6-6 for sure. That's got to be it. That's the minimum standard. I think 6-6 gets it done. If Kalani gets back to a bowl, then I think Kalani is for sure back at BYU next year, without a doubt, unless he decides to leave on his own. But I don't think it's as simple as saying, hey, 5-7, he's absolutely fired either, because there's different paths to get to 5-7. Last year's 5-7, that sucked. I mean, that was a really disappointing 5-7 because they were 5-2 and then finished 5-7. If Kalani goes that kind of 5-7, it's going to be really hard to ignore the pressure, to ignore the critics that say it's time to usher in a new era. Now, if they go 5-7 and they're competitive in every game and they lose to ranked teams like Arizona and K-State and Utah, and they're competitive and maybe they find a quarterback, maybe McKay Hillstead takes over, or maybe Jake Retzloff shows really, really well, that 5-7 probably doesn't hurt as much. It doesn't mean that Kalani's job is going to be secure forever, but that kind of 5-7 doesn't hurt a fan as much as last year's 5-7 does. So I don't think it's as simple as record, but I do think that a bowl game is kind of that get out of jail free card. If Kalani gets back to a bowl with this schedule, then I think Kalani is undoubtedly back in 2026. Next question, kind of similar. What would it take to get everyone to trust A-Rod again? What kind of QB talent will he need to get for this next class? This is a great question because I like the way that it's asked in two separate questions, because I think that those are two separate answers. I want to tackle the second question first. What kind of talent would it take for A-Rod to have everybody's confidence again? I don't know. I mean, I think Nolan Keeney's the real deal. I think he's the kind of talent that could come into BYU and make everybody feel comfortable about the quarterback position. I think McKay Hillstead with time. McKay Hillstead in week 1 of this year, probably not. But McKay Hillstead with time, I think, is the kind of quarterback, has the kind of talent that will make BYU fans feel comfortable in A-Rod again. So I think the talent is there. Now, surely, if A-Rod were to find a way to get Helaman Kasunga in the 2026 class, to pull Ryder Lyons out, a 5-star guy, obviously, I mean, that's an obvious question. But I think that the talent is secondary to what happens on the field. And that's really what comes in to the first question. What would it take to get everyone to trust A-Rod again? They've got to show some competence last year. I mean, they got to show some competence this year. If we look at last year, we spent a lot of time, the collective BYU fan base, me, you, every BYU fan watching this, we spent a lot of time debating, is the problem Keaton Slovis or is it something else? And I think that's a fair debate. And I don't think that Keaton Slovis was the problem. All of that stuff, great. But all of that notwithstanding, Keaton Slovis wasn't the solution. And neither was Jake Retzloff. The quarterback was not the solution to any of BYU's problems. So BYU had a ton of stuff. And the quarterback in a lot of cases, right? You look at Zach Wilson back in 2018. Zach Wilson was the answer to BYU's problems. That does not mean they had elite wide receivers in 2018. The offensive line was still up and down in 2018. And there were question marks that led BYU to adding a bunch of transfer running backs like Tyson Williams and Emmanuel Lasupa, because there were question marks about the running back position in 2018. But the quarterback was solidified by Zach Wilson, and he became the answer. So regardless of what happened everywhere else, BYU had an answer at quarterback. Therefore, 2019 felt pretty good. BYU's got to find their answer, because last year, whoever was at fault was not an answer. BYU cannot leave the 2024 season with all of us still scratching our heads saying, I have no idea what's going to happen. Now, BYU could turn to Gary Bohannon. He could start every game, and then he's going to leave, and we're back into a quarterback conundrum where there is no starting quarterback. But that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't an answer on the roster. If Jake Retzloff were to take big strides and show well in limited time, that would make people feel confident. If McKay Hillstead or Trayson Bourget or some of these other guys were to step up, that would make people feel confident, right? I mean, think back to, when Max Hall was running the scout team, people kind of knew that he was there, and that people felt good about that. So it doesn't necessarily mean somebody has to get into the starting lineup and start 12 games, but there's got to be reasons for hope for the future. There was not a lot of hope coming out of 2023. You got to have hope. If there's hope, then I think that BYU fans will start to trust A-Rod again. Next question. This is a great question. Do we have any legit playmakers at the defensive tackle position? Why under Jay Hill aren't we landing any blockbuster defensive tackle recruits? Fantastic question. Again, 2 parts. Let's separate them again into 2, and we'll take the on the field today on roster question first. Are there any legit playmakers at defensive tackle? Guys, I think John Nelson has NFL potential. He hasn't had NFL help. He's got to get lucky on that front. He's got to be able to stay on the field. But when he's on the field, John Nelson's very, very good. He is wildly underrated by BYU fans. I love what John Nelson brings to the table. He makes this the defensive line, he makes it different. And if he can stay healthy, he's going to free things up for guys on the edge like Batty and Isaiah Banya, those guys. I really, really like John Nelson. I think that David Latu can play. A lot of people think that he can play. I think Blake Mangelson sliding inside. He did a lot of good things from the defensive end spot last year. He's going to play a lot on the interior of the defensive line. The biggest answer is Sonny Tuwala. He's now up to about 280, 290 pounds. He was signed as an edge rusher. They expect him to be a 3-tech. I was on Dave McCann and Blaine Fowler's show, Wise Guys, and Blaine and I got to talking about Sonny Tuwala, and he mentioned that he'd had conversations with Gary Anderson, where Gary Anderson said, hey, Sonny Tuwala, that's a 305-pound 3-tech who goes in the first round of the NFL draft. I don't know if I'm ready to get on first round of the NFL draft kind of hype, but Sonny Tuwala is the real deal. Now, second question, why under Jay Hill aren't we landing any blockbuster defensive tackle recruits? Because Utah, you guys aren't going to like this answer, but because Utah is very, very good. I mean, that's really the answer. BYU is not losing very many defensive tackles to Oklahoma State. They're not losing very many defensive tackles to Arizona. They are losing defensive tackles to Utah, and you got to tip your cap to the Utes. And if you look at it, it makes all the sense in the world. They've had a long history of defensive tackles under Kyle Whittingham. Lewis Powell is a phenomenal defensive line coach. Luther Ellis is up there coaching the defensive line as well. I mean, they've got a lot going for them up on the hill, and they're winning a lot of games. So when a guy is down to BYU and Utah, especially a defensive tackle, that's a really, really tough battle for BYU to win. Now, that doesn't mean they can't win, and that doesn't mean that they should just resign themselves to losing. They've got to figure it out. But if you're asking why under Jay Hill are we not getting more defensive tackle recruits? Because Kyle Whittingham, Morgan Scalley, Lou Powell, and Luther Ellis are still doing what Utah has done for the last 10, 12 years. And that's really, really tough to beat. That's just kind of the reality. All right, next question. We'll move along here. Wide receivers, in my view, underperformed last year. Do you have confidence that they will be better this year? A lot of confidence in that group right now. I like the talent, but I'm a little bit skeptical. Yeah, I think so. I think we underestimated how difficult it is to learn an offense. And when we look last year, that wide receiver room, okay, Cody Epps was hurt. Parker Kingston was still just a freshman. Chase Roberts was really the only guy that was healthy that knew what was going on. Darius Lassiter, brand new. Keelan Marion, brand new. There was a lot of new, and then you factor in new quarterbacks and new offensive linemen. That was a lot of new. I think this year, particularly in the wide receiver room, experience is going to pay dividends. So I like the talent. I'm with Daniel Rigby here. The talent is there. I'm with most people. I think everybody universally agrees that the wide receiver spot is really, really strong, really, really talented for BYU. I like it. I like the talent. I like the experience even more than I like the talent. Having that extra year in the program is going to pay off for BYU. Moving along, isn't Bohannon the same quarterback who played for UCF? No, he played for USF, just a small detail, who barely hit over 55% of his passes and was really not that great. Why is he being hailed as the great quarterback and the answer to BYU's problems? Yes, that is the quarterback. That's just a fact. I don't think anybody's hailing him as a great quarterback. I just don't. I think that what people are saying is that he is a better quarterback than Jake Retzloff. And that I agree with. That I agree with wholeheartedly. Gary Bohannon has a lot of tools to be very, very good. I don't think anybody has ever claimed Gary Bohannon's on his way to the NFL. I don't think anybody has ever said, hey, Gary Bohannon's going to be the next Zach Wilson or the next Jaron Hall. I haven't heard that from anybody in my conversations with media, with fans, with sources. I haven't heard that from a soul. But what I have heard is that Gary Bohannon looks like he's going to be better for BYU in 2024 than Jake Retzloff. That I think we agree with. He's not the answer to all of BYU's problems. He's not the return of QBU, but he might be the best option in the room right now. And I think that is I think that's the reality of what BYU's room looks like right now. Freshman that will get playing time, and is BYU considering a 2-quarterback game like West Virginia used to do? I haven't heard anybody talk about 2 quarterbacks. I've heard 2 quarterbacks are going to play, meaning that, yeah, the odds that one quarterback stays healthy for every snap is very slim. I have not heard any discussions about a true, Riley Nelson, Jake Heaps 2-quarterback system. I don't think that's going to happen, but 2 quarterbacks are going to play this year. Yes. Freshmen that will get playing time. Jay Hill kind of talked about a couple of them. Ephraim Asiata. I guess that was Kelly Papinga. Kelly Papinga talked about Ephraim Asiata getting some playing time. Vili Pua is probably going to get some playing time as well. Trey Alexander at corner is right there in the mix. Reiner Swanson at tight end. There's going to be a good mix of freshmen who play. Cody Hagan, if he could stay healthy, I've kind of chalked him up as a redshirt guy because it's just so hard to be a skill player that comes off of a mission. I think he got home in May. That's a quick turnaround for a skill player to start making an impact in Big 12 football. But if anybody could do it, it's Cody Hagan, and he's the real deal. His talent is exceptional. He could find a way to make an impact as well. Okay, I think we're at our last question for the day. What additions has BYU made to their recruiting department? How have those changes made a difference so far? And what is BYU still lacking to compete with Big 12 competition and recruiting resources? It's a great question. I think BYU is a lot closer than people think. Now, BYU was lacking. We got to take a step back. BYU wasn't just lacking in recruiting. They were lacking in strength and conditioning, in analysts, in off-season stuff. I mean, they were lacking in a lot of areas, like anybody who has not, who wasn't a power conference team. They were lacking in a lot of areas. The strength and conditioning staff, I mean, you've heard coaches rave about the difference of their players going into camp this year. That's because BYU invested a ton into those resources. They've invested a ton into the nutrition. They've added analysts like Chad Kay, like Gary Anderson. Those are big analysts. That's big time to have as an analyst. So they've invested a lot in their program. Now, recruiting is just starting to see those investments coming through. Vince Fayula is there. They've moved Brandon Bradley to more of a director of recruiting kind of role. Justin Anderson is more of a general manager right now. Annie Barham has taken over as the on-campus coordinator. They just recently hired my guy into the room. I don't even know what his title is, but Tyus Moe, he's a young up-and-comer who's been in the high school ranks here locally. I think he's a spectacular recruiter, a big-time addition for BYU. Because I know just from the high school world how connected he is, how respected he is among these players and high school coaches across the Wasatch Front. That's a big deal. So you're starting to see more recruiting resources coming, but BYU had to add a lot of resources in a lot of places. Strength and conditioning, I think, was the biggest and most glaring thing. That got addressed first. Now recruiting is starting to come along as well, and you'll start to see more of those things pay off in the future. This was great. We got another one. I'm going to record it. We'll post it on a different day. Appreciate you guys for sticking around. We're close. Season's just about 2 weeks away. We're almost there to real football that we could talk about. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. And until next time, folks, give them hell.